This is the My Inner Therapist podcast, and I'm your host, Nikole Seals. This show is dedicated to the rediscovery of our innate ability to transform our lives. Think of it as an opportunity to look at your life from a safe distance, from the seat of being your own therapist. In this role, you'll learn to become an observer of your life. It's an effective way to separate our thinking self from our doing self. This way, we can take inventory of our thoughts, beliefs, and stories without judgment, but with awe, humility, and love. It's so easy to get distracted and derailed from our goals, so let this be your safe place for self-discovery. If you're tired of cliched advice and disappointing personal development programs, then I encourage you to take this journey with me. And like any good road trip, you'll need to bring a few things. Come with an open mind, a sense of humor, and the courage to see your truth. I'll be rummaging through my stuff right along with you because we're all a work in progress. The goal is to laugh and learn our way to becoming our own inner therapist. To upgrade our vocabulary, rewrite our stories and beliefs so that they help us to reach our potential. Join in the discussion by sharing your comments and thoughts, and be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. To learn more, visit myinnertherapist.com for access to courses, self-talk audio programs, articles, and videos. You can also follow me on Instagram at myinnertherapist or to subscribe to my YouTube channel. You'll find all these links in the show's description section. All right, enough with the intro. Let the session begin. Hello all. Thank you for joining me today. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend these few moments with me as we kind of go inside and we explore that place that we often don't let ourselves go, and we start to trust and connect with that, just our innate ability to be able to heal ourselves and to be able to create the lives that we want for ourselves. That's what this is all about. And in doing so, that means that sometimes we have to shed light on some of those dark places. And we are going to be doing a little bit of that in today's show as we talk about inheriting generational pain. And this is a timely topic for me because this has been work that I've been doing both personally and professionally. Professionally, I'm really, really blessed to work with so many different clients of varying backgrounds and cultures, and I'm learning so much through them, and they're teaching me so much. Sometimes I wonder if it's just a mutual exchange of support and help that we're giving one another, because I do learn so much from my clients, and I love to then come on the show and share this information with you. And one of the common threads that runs through much of the pain and suffering that we go through in our lives, I notice that this common thread is really that so much of it is from generations before. So much of it is pain or struggle or suffering that we've inherited from whether it's our parents or the elders in our family, and we take it on as our own. And we don't ever really talk about this, especially when it comes to traditional mental health services. It's not often that you can sit in a therapy session and really come to understand generational pain. You know, it often is talked about as your pathology, as your family history. You discuss some of maybe the patterns that are impacting you in present day and have impacted you from childhood into adulthood. And that's kind of where we leave it. And what we don't talk about is really what that looks like, how that shows up and it manifests in our lives, and what we can do about that. What are some of the barriers that we have to overcome, and why we tend to carry this type of generational pain throughout our lives and pass that on to future generations. And I want to do a little bit of that today. I want to shed some light on a topic that is rarely discussed, and that's the whole goal here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to jump into it. And I want to start first by really kind of just giving you a working definition of generational pain. And it really is any type of emotional pain or suffering that gets carried and passed along through family systems. And then that moves from generation to generation. So as we think about our ancestors and their experience here and what they went through and their emotional suffering, what we don't tend to realize is that we have that experience. We have the almost kind of the emotional imprint of that experience on us, because that gets handed through the generations. That gets carried by individuals within a family system, and it gets passed on to future generations. And as a result of not only not talking about it within the mental health profession, but we don't talk about it within the system, within the family. And as a result, it has a major impact on our emotional health. And it affects us in a number of different ways. It can affect our emotional health. It can affect our physical health. It can also cause us to really struggle when it comes to how we self-identify, how we identify with our culture, that sense of belonging, and if we feel like we fit in. And I think one of the best examples that I can give you is when we talk about, if you have a child and they could even be a young adult who experienced some form of abandonment, and maybe they ended up being raised by people who weren't part of their family. And so there's this sense of not belonging. And so often what we don't realize is that that is sometimes a pattern that has existed in previous generations within that family. We don't sometimes sit with it long enough and go deep enough to recognize that this is an emotional belief system that manifests itself in different ways and continues to show up in each generation because it's unhealed and it's unresolved. And that happens within all families, not just families that have been broken and fragmented and have been torn apart by abandonment. But there have been forced separations in families. There have been families that have been separated as a result of loss or death during times of war. And we don't do enough acknowledgement of that pain. We share the stories, but we don't necessarily talk about the impact that has. And so we go about our lives and we think as individuals, we see people struggling within a family system. And maybe that shows up in some of the more common forms like addiction or abuse or depression. And sometimes we just attribute that to the individual. We think that this is a personal problem that individual is going through. And we don't often recognize that there's something deeper. There is there's a blueprint that's still at work in each of us, in each individual. And some of us are able to overcome that. Some of us are able to overwrite that with our own new belief systems that we put into place. And some of us don't. Some of us use that blueprint to govern our lives. And so as a result, we have these experiences, these life experiences, and we engage in behaviors that are very similar to some of the past suffering and past pain of our ancestors. And I think, again, we often look for it in the form of some of the more common ways that we identify dysfunction, like addiction and abuse. But I think it also shows up in other forms that we just don't really recognize as being related to our generational pain. And that could be in the form of lack and limitation, if we go through life carrying limited beliefs, or if we live our lives based on this idea of lack and never having enough. There are also ways in which it shows up in scarcity, where it's always this struggle, this never getting what you need, and having to really live below your means and live beneath your means, and to be in an environment where it's always about being in need. We see this sometimes with families who have the mindset of victimhood, of always being the victim of their circumstances. This can show up in those people who are, the fighters, who are constantly in survival mode and always kind of waiting for that other shoe to drop, and knowing that life is hard and life is a struggle, and so you gotta be ready to fight when you need to. And as I mentioned before, sometimes it shows up as a lack of identity, just not even knowing who you are and where you belong. And my belief is that when we start to recognize these patterns and we're able to link them up with what we know about our family history and what we've been told about our ancestors, and we start to recognize the patterns of that generational pain, that in and of itself can actually be incredibly healing. And what it does is it creates an opportunity for us to be able to end that cycle, to be able to bring an end to whatever pattern has plagued the generations for years. We can start practicing some conscious awareness to liberate ourselves from that. And I think that this is especially true for people of color, for the different cultures that have historically experienced suffering and the trauma and emotional pain that comes with that suffering, and over the years gets deeply, deeply embedded into our stories, into our practices, into our identity. And I think that this is most profound in, actually I would say, I think there's so many different cultures that this shows up in a very profound way. I think we see this in the Jewish community, where you have generations later after the Holocaust, you still have family members who hold on to that pain and that suffering in the form of how they live their life, whether it's through anxiety and fear, whether through a lack of trust, whether through this constant need to protect. I think I can speak from as a representative of the Black community, as a representative of the African American community. I can recognize how this shows up, how the experience of slavery has created a mindset and has such an impact on stories and behaviors from over the years, and that it's so subtle because it's become such a part of who we are that it's almost so subtle that we don't recognize it, and we really kind of see it as an individual experience. That's how we go through it, thinking that this solely belongs to us, and we rarely think that this is linked. There's a lineage there, a connection that goes as far back as we can. Basically, it goes as far back as our stories do, and that's another part of this. The suffering is that our stories often are limited, because we don't often have the stories that remind us of our glory, of our power. So what we do is we focus on those that remind us of our pain. And so, we see this in, like I said, I think that this exists in all the many different cultures. I think within the Asian American culture, there's this suffering that comes from the years of discrimination, the encampments. I think that we definitely see this and how it is manifested within the indigenous people here in this country, the decimation of family systems, of tribes, of cultural practices, of the connection with the land. It's profuse, and And I think, one of the things I love about indigenous tribes and natives here is that they work so hard to hold on to their stories, and they work so hard to connect to those stories of empowerment. And I think that that's something that we all can learn from, in recognizing how that can help us to heal. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, and how we can actually implement that into our lives. When, the problem is when it goes unacknowledged, when we don't pay attention to it, when we don't recognize the patterns, when we don't fully look past ourselves down the line at generations, what ends up happening is that this pain becomes deeper and deeper. It gets more embedded into our psyche. It becomes more embedded into our stories. And I think the deeper it goes, the harder it is to see it and to recognize it. And I note stories because I think stories are such a huge part of it. It's how we communicate, but it's also how we explain. It's also how we describe. It's also how we create beliefs. It's our stories govern so much of what we do, but it also governs how we feel about ourselves, and it also governs how we view ourselves. So what we tell ourselves through our stories is so important to our healing. It's also really critical in determining how much of our pain we're going to continue to carry. And I will say this, it's also what we don't share with one another, the stories that we aren't telling, that actually end up hurting us. And really what it does is I think it puts such limitations on our ability to be able to move past it. I think that's a big part of why we struggle, is because we just don't share. And it's amazing to me. I always kind of thought of my own family as being this, being close, yet not really knowing my family. There being this disconnect from understanding, little bits and pieces of information just missing, like whole bits of history just being untold. And I get that a good part of that is because as far as Blacks and African Americans go, our history has been purposely erased, and so much of it has been, I think so much of it has been inaccessible, has been made inaccessible because you have so much more control over somebody when you own their stories and you hold their stories from them, and you keep their history from them. You have so much more control over people. So that was done purposely. So I completely recognize that lack of information and the role that it plays. But within the family system, there's a withholding of information. There's this failure to share. There's this, this generational practice of holding on to pain instead of talking about it and making other family members aware of it. And that, for me, I know in my own personal journey of trying to heal generational pain, I know that that's been the biggest barrier for me to overcome, is just the gaps of information, the skeletons in the closet, the stories that were never told, the suffering that was never shared. And it wasn't until I started pushing and digging and asking for that information, that picture, the picture of my family, and I'm just talking my immediate family. Like I haven't even really been able to get too deep into, second, third generations past. I'm still unearthing some of the untold stories from my generation. And in doing so, every time I learn something new, things become so much clearer for me as to our circumstances and why we are the way that we are. And I'll tell you that people are not comfortable with it. I think anytime you're asking someone to go to a place where there's some pain that they've worked so hard to suppress, there's some resistance and reluctance to bringing that to light. And I think that's mostly because we also we don't really acknowledge that our healing and our liberation is in stepping into that discomfort. And our avoidance is what keeps us stuck there. So I've really been working to create an environment for those family members that I know I have a direct link, like that their pain has become my pain. I've really worked hard to try to create a safe environment where they're open to sharing that. And that requires, it requires no judgment. It requires acceptance. Like, you have to go into that withholding your judgment and just being open to whatever you hear. And that's not easy to do. I will say this, though, it has brought me a tremendous amount of clarity. It has helped me to start my healing process. It has also equipped me with the ability to help those who have come after me, the generations after me, to help them heal their generational pain that was handed down from my generation to them. And that to me ultimately is what I want to do. I recognize that there are some family members who are not on board with my plan, with people who want no part of my journey, who want to hold on to what they have, hold on to their pain and take it with them as they leave this earth. And that is completely up to them. We cannot hold people to our expectations. If it's not in alignment with somebody else's desire, then you have to let it go. But you do have the choice to decide to do differently for yourself. And you also have choice to decide to do differently for your own family and for those family members that you've brought into this world, the younger family members that you're helping to raise. You can make a conscious choice that it's going to be different for you. And that's essentially what I've done. And of those family members who are willing to talk to me about their pain and their experience, it's been healing really does not do it justice. It has been a conscious awakening. It has really brought not only clarity, but just understanding, a deep, deep sense of understanding. And I think when we don't have those conversations, when we become complicit in allowing this mindset and the limitations and the abuse, the addiction, the victimhood, the survival mode, when we allow that to persist, we do become enablers at that point. We then are making a choice to have that carry on into future generations. And I say that with no judgment, because that is a choice that you get to make. What I am saying is that it hurts my heart to think of people closing the window on an opportunity to heal their pain. And by having conversations that sometimes may feel painful or discomfort or uncomfortable, that unfortunately is the road to liberation. That's the road to our freedom. And I can tell you from my own personal experience in doing it that just by asking questions and doing that from a place of understanding and withholding judgment, my healing has come from that, but I've also been able to facilitate the healing of other people, because there's times that people recognize that they can feel the benefit of sharing their story and talking about their pain. Because, we've talked about this before in other podcasts, that emotional pain lives in our body. It lives in our body as energy. When it does not get expressed, when it does not have places to move, it will move and manifest in our bodies. And it will show up, whether that's in the form of some kind of physical condition, stress. It will work its way out. Let me put it that way. So rather than letting it work its way out, why not give it a place to express itself? Why not create a way for it to come out of the body, to verbalize it and to express it in a way to where it is removed from you. And you also get to facilitate that very same healing in the person that you're talking to. And I think that that's what we don't have discussions about enough, is what comes with that step into discomfort, what it can bring you. And I'm not saying that it's going to repair all your relationships and it's going to bring you closer together and you guys are going to connect. What I am saying is that you have to just go in with the expectation of an open mind and knowing that this is just about your healing. If you facilitate it for someone else, then, it's a win-win. It's a beautiful situation. But this really has to be about, you can't hold that expectation for other people. You can only make that choice for yourself. So when it comes to that healing, I do want to just talk a little bit about what that looks like and how you can begin that process for yourself and possibly the generations that come after you in your family systems. And it really, really begins with simple awareness, right? Is having a conscious awareness that this generational pain even exists. And I think that this is especially important for those of you women of color who are listening to this conversation, and you know this is the truth, that it is often up to us to be the facilitators of these type of conversations and discussions, and that so much of it is tied into our culture, and sometimes we have to step outside of those cultural norms and be okay with that, and see the road ahead, know where we're going with it, and trust in the process. And so as women, we need to be the ones who are reaching out, and we need to be the ones who are practicing that awareness. I'm not solely putting the burden on us, because Lord knows that we've got so much on our plate that we're already responsible for. What I am saying is that I think because we have been gifted, I think that as women, we have a power that is especially innate to us about when it comes to nurturing and empathy. And I think because of that, we have a greater capacity for it. So when I say it's up to us women, that's what I mean. And I think when you gain that awareness, it then becomes about communication. And the communication part is important because you are either going to communicate in a way that opens people up and it makes them feel comfortable and safe in responding and opening and sharing, or we're going to approach people and communicate in a way that shuts them down. And so we have to be aware of our approach. We have to be aware of our motivation. If it's to get answers and to hold blame and to create resentments, to unleash our anger, then that's not healing at all. It's not. It might even create more pain. If you are about the healing, you have to let go of the motivation, which is to, I call it the get back, right? Anytime there's some kind of resentment or revenge, or I want to get back, or I want to hurt them the way that they hurt me, that's not going to bring about healing. You have to come from a place where it is about understanding. It's about getting information. It's about asking thoughtful questions. It's about, and this is the next piece to it that I wanted to talk about. It's about having empathy. We as women have this amazing capacity for empathy, and in this situation where we're trying to get someone to open up and share about their experience and their stories and that darkness and those skeletons in the closet, we have to do that by empathizing with them, by empathizing with their experience and recognizing what it was like for them at that time in their life. And it's when we're able to do that, to practice empathy, and maybe that even shows up in the form of forgiveness. Maybe it just shows up in the form of recognition. Maybe it just shows up in the form of listening and hearing them out with no response, just allowing them to share and express themselves. So when we're able to provide that, when we're able to create that kind of a secure, safe environment you'd be surprised at what you'll discover and what you'll hear. I will say that. I've learned some deeply painful truths about my family history that, while they brought me clarity, they also hurt my heart. And you have to have courage in doing this to know that that's a possibility. And at the same time, recognize that it can also be overcome. That this is a story, and this moves us into the next part of what that healing process looks like, is that our stories can be rewritten. Our stories can be told in a way to where they share our truth, but they also capture our power. They also demonstrate our strength. They also empower us. And so in hearing about the heartbreak and hearing about the suffering and hearing about the pain, it's in making a decision in that moment that I'm going to take that information and create a version of that story that works for me, that works for me to move past it, and that works for me to heal, and it works for me to help the generation after me not carry so much of the pain and carry more of the power. So, as you know, if you've listened, if you're a regular listener to the show, I'm constantly talking about rewriting our stories and being so mindful of our language and the things that we tell ourselves. And our cultural history is a huge part of that, because we all have those stories that either empower us or they make us feel powerless. And it's all in the storyteller. That storyteller is an incredibly powerful person, because you can change the whole outcome of that story by the way that you tell it. And you can do it in a way where it is completely honest and it holds the truth. And so, that's what this healing process looks like. It's about being consciously aware. It's about using communication techniques where you're able to communicate with past generations and getting a better understanding about the generational pain and patterns, about the family pathology, practicing empathy when you hear it, withholding your judgments about it, not going into it with the motivation of revenge and resentment and anger and answers, but going into it in a place of understanding and empathy and forgiveness and acceptance. And then also knowing that we can rewrite those stories. Once we know what we know, that we can rewrite that story so that it serves us, so that it serves our purpose, that it helps our healing. And we can do that in a way that's honest and I think just really, too, a testament to those people before us, to our ancestors, to those who really went through it and did not have an outlet, didn't have a voice. That's one of the things that, I have to tell you, that's one of the things I just was so impactful in understanding about when I hear my parents' story and I hear my grandparents' story, and I recognize that they were living their lives in a time where their voice did not matter. And imagining how hard it is to have a voice and to speak your pain when you know that it doesn't matter. So just that bit of information alone, I was able to rewrite my story about the importance of my voice. Because it didn't make sense at that time for me to be silent about certain things when I'm living in a time where I do get to speak. I mean, I'm on a podcast, for God's sakes. We have so many opportunities to tell our stories and to share our voice and to speak our truth. And how dare I hold on to mine and remain silent in this day and age when I have these past generations who just didn't even have the opportunities that I have. In that way, I feel like it's my responsibility. In a good way, though. It's like a good responsibility to have. So, generational pain. That's it in a nutshell. I think I want to keep this. I don't want to get too deep into this because I want to give you something to think about. I want you to walk away from this episode and I want you to start maybe connecting the dots in your own family, to start wondering about those questions that you had, those gaps of information, the stories that never seemed quite right and felt like there was information missing, and maybe consider having a conversation about it. And really maybe stepping into vulnerability and starting that conversation off by sharing your own pain and suffering. That really is one of the best ways to get somebody else to open up and talk about their own pain. So I would love to hear from you if this is something that you've already done and what you've learned from it and how it's changed your life. I also really want to hear from you if you're thinking like, this is something I would love to do. I don't even know how to go about doing it. It seems really crazy and scary. You don't know my family. I would love to hear from you too. Please go ahead and connect with me. Go to myinnertherapist.com. Go to my contact page. You can reach me there. Send me a message. Ask me a question. Tell me your story. And also you can, whatever podcast app that you're listening to this on, you can, either you can leave a message there, or you can go to my YouTube channel, My Inner Therapist, and you can make a comment there and leave a message for me there as well. So be sure to subscribe to the show. Make sure that you are liking the episodes, if you like them, and that you're subscribed to the show. And also share these on your social media. If you feel like you know some people who could really benefit from hearing this information, if you have a group or an institution or organization that you think really needs to hear any of this information or these messages, then please do be sure to share this on your social media. Okay, so thank you for joining me today. And I like, this is a topic for me that is personal. It's emotional for me because, like I said, I'm still in it. I'm still knee deep in this process, and I love it. I'm learning so much. I have zero regrets about it, and yeah, it can be challenging, but I feel like I have never known myself better, and never been more certain about where I come from as a result of having done this. So, and I want that for you too. So thank you for being here. Continue to come back and join me in these conversations. And as always, reach out to me because I do love hearing from you. Okay, take care. All right, that's a wrap for today's show. Remember, your words have the power to repel or attract the life that you want to live. Choose wisely. Until next time, friends.